Now let's talk about how Houdini is structured. So when we create a 3D scene, we work with 3D models, we work with geometry, we work with points, primitives, and we also work with materials and shaders, and we also need to light them, and we also need to render the scene, and we need to create some cameras and all of these things that make a 3D scene. So Houdini divide all of these tasks into what called the different context. So in here, if you come over here where it says objects, so the object is basically as a scene level. So onto the object level, we call this one also a scene level. And if you click on this, here as you can see, we have these other networks. So we have the chops and we also have the image network, material and objects. So all of these are Houdini context. Okay. So to work with geometry, we have a SOP context. So if I add a SOP network in here, and here as you can see, I have created a geometry node that is named to geo1. So that is effectively a SOP network. So inside we have some SOP nodes. We can dive inside this geometry node if you press enter. Okay, so now we are in the SOP context, and here as you can see, it is written in here the geometry. So if we right click, so we have all of these nodes. These are what called the SOP nodes. These are the surface operators. Okay, and if we take a look at the path here as you can see, we are inside of the geometry 1. So first we were at the object level. So the object level is our top level, the scene level, and we have created a geo1. Okay, and here as you can see, we have this icon. So that is this icon represents the SOPs. Okay, I can click on this object level to go back. Okay, and now we are back at the scene level. Here as you can see, it is written in here objects. So at the scene level, we have all of these. We have this geometry node, and in here, if we want to create a material, if we have a node called material network. So if I add this, so we have created a mat net. So that is the material network. I can dive inside, and here as you can see, we are in the Vex builder. So if I right click, here we have all of these Vex nodes. So Vex is a Houdini shading language, and in here we have some of these Vex nodes, and we also have the shaders. I can create a principal shader in here. So if I type principal shader, let's add this. So principal shader is the Uber shader for the Houdini that is used by Mantra as well as the new Houdini render engine Karma. So that is the Uber shader for that. And let's go back at the scene level, and in here we also have a node called ShopNet, and the shop network, which means it's the shading operators. So if I add this, and here as you can see, we have the ShopNet, and if we dive inside, and here as you can see, the context has been renamed to shaders. So in here, if I right click, we have these different menu, and in here we have all of these built-in shader. We have some procedural shader, and onto the surface we have the surface shaders, and in here we should have the principal shader. So if I type in, so I think principal shader is not in the shader network, but we have all of these different shader. We have the material shader builder. I can create this swap and dive inside, and in here we should have a principal shader, and here as you can see, we have the principal shader. Okay, so These two nodes are for creating the materials, and for creating the lighting and camera. We can create the lights and camera right at the object level because that is also the scene level. So if I right click, and in here I can type the camera node to create a camera, or I can also create some lights if I type light, and here we have access to all of these different lights. Okay, and we also have a dedicated context for creating the for rendering and lighting, and that is called the LOPNet. And LOPNet, let's create a LOP network. Let's add this. That is, LOPNet is stand for the lighting operators. If we dive inside, and in here as you can see, the context has been changed to Solaris. So in here, Solaris is the new user interface for lighting and rendering our scene. That, and in the Solaris, when we are working with Solaris, we are working with UST. We will talk more about the UST and Solaris later in this course, but you should know that LOPNet is there. That is the Houdini context for creating, for lightening the scene. Okay, let's go back, and in here for creating the dynamic simulation we have a context called top network. Let's add this. So here as you can see, we have different icons. Top net, I can press enter or triple click on this node to dive inside, and here as you can see, now we are in the dynamics context, and in here I can create some rigid body simulation. Here we have the rigid body solver. All of the dynamics simulation related nodes are here in the dynamic context. Okay, so these are what called the tops. These are the dynamic operators. Okay, let's go back, and in here we also have a context called ChopNet. Chop network is for the channel operators. If we dive inside, here as you can see, it is renamed to motion effects, and in here we can create some procedural animation. Okay, we will talk more about this later in the course. And we also have a composting context in here as well, and that is called the COPS. So we have two different contexts. We have the COP network, that is the new, and we also have the COP network old. So that is the composting network that we had previously in the previous versions of Houdini. So if I create a COP.NET old and dive inside, and here as you can see, that is called the composting, and in here we have all of these composting operator. Okay, and we also have a new context that is called the Copernicus. So if I create a COP network in here and dive inside, and here you can see that is called the Copernicus, and that is the new context for creating the procedural materials. Okay, so let's go back, and in here we have all of these different contexts for organizing our 3D scenes. Okay, and you do not necessarily need to create all of these contexts at the scene level. So right now at the object level, you do not necessarily need to create in here. You can also dive inside each of these contexts by clicking on this object option. I can go into the shop context, and here as you can see, we are in the shader context. I can go into the material context. Okay, so I have access to all of these different contexts. Let's go back onto the object level. I can create context inside of the context. For example, if I go inside of this sub context, that is the geometry node. So let's dive inside. We are in the geometry context. I can create in here a material network. So if I create a material network, and here as you can see, now I have created another context inside of this geometry context. Now I can dive inside, and in here I can create the materials. For example, I can create a principal shader in here. Okay, and let's go back, and we have the material net inside of the geometry, and we also have the material network at this scene level as well. Okay, so think of it as a folder, so you can create these different folder anywhere you like. Okay, so you are not constrained to the object level or at the scene level. So let's say if you are working with in here, let's say I want to create a simple geometry. I'm going to create a simple grid. So let's add a grid geometry in here. Okay, and if you want to create a material for the grid specifically in here, I can create a mat net. Okay, in front at the side of the grid, and in here I can create a specific material for my grid. Okay, and I can assign these shader as well as adjust these values specifically for the grid, and I can keep things organized that way. Or I can go into the context. For example, let's go into the material context. I can create all of the materials in this context and start assigning them. Okay, so these are the different contexts for organizing your 3D scenes, and we will talk all of them in details in this course. Okay, so first let's focus on to our this geometry context, because that is the context where we will create geometry as well as our 3D models. Okay,